right, good morning. My name is Alix Jules. I'm the Executive Director for the Fellowship of Freethought. Welcome. Do we have any visitors here today, any first times? Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this Father's Day. In the back there, we have a silent auction going on for the Women of Reason Conference that is slated. There's a lot of yummies and goodies and stuff that you probably should stay clear away from, except for today, right? Okay, but you can see Melanie in the back. All right, do we have any fathers, stepfathers, father figures, big brothers who had to be fathers? Yes, happy Father's Day. First-time fathers, hi there, Zach. Happy Father's Day. Okay, thank you all for coming out and joining us. Family is one of the cornerstones of the fellowship in any configuration and incarnation, with or without fathers. I wasn't fortunate enough to grow up with a father or father figure in my home. My parents divorced fairly young, and the memories of my father are from infrequent encounters throughout life and through pictures. His absence was one of the guiding hands throughout my life, whether I realized it growing up or not. It gave me time to formulate the idea of what a dad should be, what I always wanted, basically. So when I became a father, not having an archetype or standard to rely on, I had to rely on the idea of what should a dad do, and ask the question, WWMFIODD. What would my fictitious ideal of a daddy do? Seriously, I mean, you'd be surprised at how many times I've had to go back to that question. And even then, sometimes you just have to wing it, right? So many years ago, when I became a daddy, I was faced with one of my most challenging questions of a first-time father, or any parent. What's going to be his first book? It's actually, it can be very contentious amongst parents, right? You will fight over this one. My first inclination was The Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss, which was a very inspirational book for me. But I eventually decided on Little Bear. For those of you who hadn't had the pleasure of reading, it's a series written by Elsie Minark and illustrated by Maurice Sendak. Most of the characters are moderately anthropomorphic animals exhibiting both animal and human behaviors, but generally dealing with human problems and concerns. Many of the issues dealt with include independence, work ethic, fairness, etc. What you would expect. The storyline, since it was a children's book, was very enjoyable and it was a very easy read. The TV series became a favorite for two of my children. Right? Believe it or not, this was my first introduction to Sendak's work. Before becoming a father, I had not read or seen most of what he was most noted for, including this, right, Where the Wild Things Are, a book that tells the story of Max, who one evening plays around his home making mischief in a wolf costume. As a punishment, his mother sends him to bed without supper. In his room, a mysterious wild forest and sea grows out of his imagination, and Max sails to the land of wild things. Max eventually becomes the king of all wild things, dancing with the monsters in wild rumpus. However, he soon finds himself lonely and homesick and returns to home where he returns to his bedroom where he finds supper waiting for him still hot. For those that haven't read it, the in-between-the-lines and imaginative psychoanalytic story of anger is beautifully illustrated. There are different ways to read The Wild Things, especially through a Freudian lens, but at its core, it's a story of solidarity, a child liberated by imagination. Sendak refers to Wild Things and his other books in the Night Kitchen and outside of there as a sort of trilogy centered on children's growth, survival, change, and fury. He indicated that the three books are all variations of the same theme, how children master various feelings, danger, boredom, fear, frustration, jealousy, and manage to come to grips with realities in their lives. The book was awarded the Caldecott Medal in 1964, which recognizes most distinguished picture book awarded by the Association for Library Services for Children, although Sendak actually hated the title of child illustrator. Any idiot could do that, his words. Sendak had a different idea about the world of children. He had grown up in a home where daily life was punctuated by much sorrow and grief. You can pick up a lot of the undertone through all of his books. His parents were successful in rescuing his mother's family from Poland during the Holocaust, but by the time they were able to rescue his father's family, there were none left to be saved. As Sendak said, I grew up in a house that was in a constant state of mourning. In that sense, many of his books were autobiographical. He understood how it feels to be frightened and how someone so young lacks the skill to vanquish their fears. His aim in all his books was to pose the question, how do children survive? The New York Times referred to Sendak as the author of Splendid Nightmares. Morven Crumlish of The Guardian, in describing Sendak's work, states, "These are no cautionary tales. There is no gruesome moral shoving a reluctantly impressionable reader towards conforming to the neat, the quiet, and the untroublesome. Instead, they wake up happily in their beds, supper is still warm, there is milk in the morning." His book, In the Night Kitchen, originally issued in 1970, has often been subjected to censorship for its drawings of a young boy prancing naked through the story. The book has been challenged in most states, the American states, including Illinois, New Jersey, Minnesota, and of course, Texas. It regularly appears on the American Libraries Association of frequently challenged and banned books. Outside over there is the story of a girl, Ida, and her sibling, Jealousy and Responsibility. Her father is away, and so Ida is left to watch her baby sister, much to her dismay. Her sister is kidnapped by goblins, and Ida must go on a magical adventure to rescue her. At first, she's not really eager to get her sister and nearly passes her sister right by when she becomes absorbed in the magic of the quest. In the end, she rescues her baby sister, destroys the goblins, and returns home, committed to caring for her sister until her father returns home. If you read a lot of the books, you will notice a bit of a religious twinge in a lot of the stories, and it's probably because one of Morris's earliest memorable influences was his father, relating biblical tales to Maurice, who would then embellish them with racy details. Not realizing that this was inappropriate for children, little Maurice would frequently be sent home after retelling his father's softcore Bible tales at school. What I found very interesting was Sendak was an early member of the National Board of Advisors of the Children's Television Workshop during the development stages of the Sesame Street television series. If you actually look at it, it makes sense. He also adapted his book, Bumble Artie, into an animated sequence for the series with Jim Henson as the voice of Bumble Artie. He wrote and designed 3 other animated stories for the series, 7 Monsters, which never aired, Up and Down, and Broom Adventures. Sendak produced an animated television production based on his work titled Reality Rosie, featuring the voice of Carole King, which was broadcasted in 1975 and available on video. He contributed the opening segment to Simple Gifts, a Christmas collection of 6 animated shorts. He also adapted his work, Where the Wild Things Are, for stage in 1979. Additionally, he designed sets for many operas and ballets, including the award-winning 1983 Pacific Northwest Ballet, Tchaikovsky's The Nutcracker. In 1990, Sendak approached playwright Tony Kushner to write a new English version of the Czech composer Hans Krass's children's Holocaust opera, Bundibar. Kushner wrote the text of Sendak's illustrated book of the same name, published in 2003. It's actually a really good read. The book was named top 10 best illustrated books of 2003 when released. Sendak also created the children's television program, Seven Little Monsters. Sendak was born 1928, died this past year, 2012. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, to Jewish immigrants. He was a sick child and spent a lot of his time reading books. Later in his childhood, he came to love illustrating after seeing Disney's Fantasia. By age 20, he was a window dresser at FAO Schwartz and taking night classes at New York Arts Students League. 4 years after completing his studies, he received his first recognition as an illustrator with the publication of Ruth Cross's book, A Hole to Dig. Although he wasn't trying to write typical children's books, his reputation was as a children's storyteller. If scary situations can be considered fit for children, naturally, there were those who took exception to the notion. Sendak lived with his partner, Eugene Glynn, an actual psychoanalyst for 50 years until Glenn's death in 2007. Mr. Sendak, you turned your own childhood fears and sorrows into nightmares that can be vanquished even by small children. Thank you. Okay, so as free thinkers, we're human. We are often dealing with fear. And as we work on managing our fears, coping with what we can, given the mechanisms that we learn, it becomes easier through time. But in our own community, we battle monsters still today, whether in terms of anti-vaxxers, anti-skeptics, spiritualists, or even creationists. Today, we'll be covering a lot of those kind of monsters instead of the real ones that keep parents up at night. Just it.
Great. So since we're going to be talking about some real and fake wild things today, I thought we'd start us off with a quiz. So hopefully everybody's gotten an index card on your chair, and hopefully everybody has a writing implement. Do we have some extra pencils if anybody doesn't have one? Good. So there's some hands are coming up, and pencils will come to you shortly. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you some descriptions of some creatures, and what I want you to do is write down both the common name for the creature and then to specify whether it's fact or fiction. And just a couple of caveats here. This is the best internet research that I, and with some help from Tammy and Jamie, could do over a short period of time, and the fact or fiction estimates, the right answer is whatever I, in my estimation, say the right answer is, and so you're guessing whether I think it's fact or fiction, and if you believe in something I don't, tough. Okay, so that's the story. What I want to have you do is be sure to write your name on it, because the winners, I have free drinks at Starbucks for the people who do best on this. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. First off, we have the camel leopard. This creature is sometimes called the camel leopard because it has the shape of a huge camel, but shares the leopard's spotted coats and proclivity for trees. Specimens were once allegedly imported and displayed in Rome's Circus Maximus, but since none were seen again in Europe for centuries, many came to doubt their reality. What is the more common name for the camel leopard, and is this creature fact or fiction? I'll give everybody a moment to write answers to that. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. The first reports of this elusive snake-like creature date back to the 6th century, in which this creature killed one Scottish swimmer and was about to kill another before the prayers of St. Columba inspired it to retreat back into the Scottish river from whence it came. Okay, the prayer part is probably a myth, but numerous other sightings, photographs, and even sonar readings have made many people believers, with the issue eventually to be settled by serious science. What is this, What is the more common name for this elusive sea serpent of Scotland, and is it fact or fiction? Okay. Move on to the next one here. Number 3. The Mexican water monster. This carnivorous creature lives in Mexican lakes. It has a big boxy fish head with frilly fins and tiny teeth, but it also has a small, almost humanoid body with puny limbs and long, spindly fingers. It can breathe by gills or by gulping air from the surface into its lungs. It has amazing regenerative abilities, capable of regrowing its limbs and internal organs, even parts of its brain. What's the name for this remarkable Mexican water monster, and is it fact or fiction? Okay, number 4, goatsuckers. This elusive creature is best known for killing livestock, leaving them with puncture wounds and sucked dry of their blood. Rarely seen in action, this creature is reported to be the size of a large dog or a small bear, with leathery skin and a row of spines down its back. What's the more common name for this elusive goatsucker, and is it fact or fiction? Okay. Number 5, a missing link. This creature was first hypothesized as an evolutionary link between reptiles and birds, with the wings and body of an aquatic bird and the head of a predatory reptile. Creationists initially mocked this idea as ridiculous, but since have been caught on film waving around what one must admit looks to be very convincing photographic evidence. So perhaps evolutionists will have the last laugh after all. What's the common name for this missing link, and is this creature fact or fiction? And the last one, which I'm calling Squawkin' the Hedgehog. This creature shares the general shape of a hedgehog, along with its taste for insects and its defensive quills, including even quills on its tongue. However, this creature is also quite like a bird. It lays eggs and has a long beak and webbed feet. And if the quilled tongue wasn't sexy enough, it also has 4 penises. What is the more common name for this squawking hedgehog, and is this creature fact or fiction? Okay, so that's all the quiz questions we have. We'll give everybody a moment to finish up their answers, and then maybe if we can have them pass this way, and I think Tammy's going to collect them. And we'll reveal the answers later as we're giving the talks. Unless you don't want people to know your name. Okay. Looks like these are all moving along, so we'll let those get passed in, and while they are, we'll go ahead and let Jamie start coming up for her talk. Okay.
Now, as the new education director, it fell to me over the last month to come up with a topic for today, and I thought, man, I really want to do cryptids, and I sent it to Alix and Zach, and I said, man, I want to do monsters. Can I do monsters? I know it's not October, but can I do them anyway? And they said, I think that's a great idea. So I do want to share with you one of my passions. One of my passions is cryptozoology. As a biologist, I find it quite fascinating, but I want to talk about how you can be a skeptic and still be interested in some of the really cool, interesting myths out there. I also want to focus on modern monsters, because this mythology is not something that is, ancient Greeks coming up with weird things like minotaurs and centaurs and capricorns and stuff. We are still coming up with new monsters within our lifetimes. We've come up with these new monsters, and so I want to share some of the most recent cryptids that have come into the public consciousness and kind of how they arrived. Cryptids can be divided into several subcategories, the first of which are species that have never been successfully documented. They could be something that people have gotten photographs of, but they're unclear, but they have never actually been classified or taxonomically classified. They've never been taxonomically classified by scientists. And examples of this would be like the Yeti or the Chupacabra, where there's evidence, but all of the evidence that we have for these animals is anecdotal at best. But they are completely different species from what we have that exists in the world today. Then we have known species, and how can a known species still be a cryptid? And there are 3 examples of how known species could be cryptids. One is animals that are thought to be extinct. Nessie would be a good example of this, a coelacanth or a thylacine. These are animals that we believed were extinct and could possibly be out there, and people could be sighting these animals, and that would be classified as a cryptid sighting, because these are animals that people think or believe are extinct. And we'll get back to the fact that the coelacanth actually does still exist, and we'll talk about that in a second. The second type of known species cryptid would be an animal found in an uncharacteristic location, where if you were walking down the streets of Dallas and you saw a tiger. This actually happened to me, not in Dallas, but in College Station. Somebody owned a tiger, a pet tiger, and it got loose. And it was on the news. They're like, if you see a tiger walking, walking around in College Station, please do not try to make contact with the animal and call the police. And so there were a ton of these big cat sightings, these tiger sightings, as this tiger wandered around in College Station for 6 days uncaptured. So this would be an example of a cryptid sighting. You're like, in the middle of Texas, you don't expect to be walking down the street and see a tiger come around the corner. So examples of this also would be the black moorcats in the UK and sewer gators in New York, for example. Other examples would be an animal of an uncharacteristic size or uncharacteristic traits. When you look at animals like the white buffalo, for example, or ROUSs, if you guys know what those are. Those are rodents of unusual size. One of my favorite shows is Monster Quest, and they had a Monster Quest marathon, which may have led me to choosing this topic. But one of my favorite Monster Quest episodes was all about the huge Norway rats that people are claiming to see in New York right now. And they're claiming 4 or 5 pounds, when the record Norwegian rat size, the documented record for Norwegian rat is 1 pound. And so these people are claiming to see Norwegian rats the size of cats or small dogs. So that would be classified as a cryptid sighting as well. Sea serpents also, because there are sea snakes. They're just normally around yay long, not, yay long. So, and the last type of cryptid is a hybrid or cross or combination of already known species. Examples would be like the mermaid, the naga, which are half human, half snake, the cockatrice, which is a very interesting myth of the egg of a rooster that is fertilized by a frog that is hatched in manure becomes a cockatrice, which the vision of which will turn someone to stone. Flying serpents, the growler bear, the minotaur, the chimera, the centaurs, the ligers, the okapi, and the jackalope. These are all examples of in a way, how limited our imagination really is, because instead of actually coming up with a totally new animal, just like if you asked a child to come up with a totally new animal, they will generally take bits and pieces of existing animals and kind of put them all together, and you end up with this kind of chimera-esque monster. And so this does account for the last of our cryptids. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, of course, as a skeptic, when monsters aren't monsters. And these are the monsters that we hear about or people have heard about in the past, and then when biology actually goes to find them, they do. And this happens quite often, and it leads some credence to the study of cryptozoology, because there is unknown species out there. And by listening to some of the folklore of native residents of different areas of the planet, we have actually discovered species that otherwise we might have simply laughed off as, oh, that's just folklore, there's nothing to that. The discovery of strange new species. This is the okapi, widely believed to be a cryptid and just a monster of legend that exists in Africa. It's the only known relative of the giraffe, and it looks like a giraffe with a short neck and zebra stripes. And when the natives told the visiting biologists about the okapi, they were dismissed as simply things of legend. When, in fact, when the first explorers to the African continent found an okapi, shot it, stuffed it, and sent it back to the British Museum of Natural History, they believed that it was a hoax and that someone had taken a giraffe and put a zebra hide over it. And so it was disregarded for almost 60 years before they realized that this was actually an animal. This is a Ajwole. It is an armed salamander, and it's very, very fascinating. It's a cave-dwelling creature. It's an amphibian, and I actually had a chance to see one of these in person. They look really, really bizarre, but they're also quite small. So the photograph, of course, doesn't show you scale. So if you were to say, that kind of looks like what someone might imagine a naga to look like, right? It's got little arms, it's got a little head, and it's got like a snake-like body. But sometimes nature can be stranger than our imaginations and come up with some really bizarre animals or some bizarre crosses. This is a growler bear. It is a cross between a grizzly and a polar bear, long thought to be the stuff of legend or our imaginations. This is actually a viable cross. Growler bears are actually not only possible, but they are fertile. So we've since learned that grizzlies and polar bears are far more genetically similar than we first thought. And this is a tree kangaroo. It is actually a marsupial in the kangaroo genus that lives in trees, climbs trees, eats fruit out of trees, and jumps from tree to tree. And it was believed by the Aborigine people to be a demon. Its eyes do glow back green, which makes it fairly unique among most other mammals. And so if you do shine a light at these guys, it does look kind of demonic looking down from the trees, and apparently they make a screeching sound similar to a lady screaming, which doesn't really help their reputation much. So the other thing that can lead to our perception of actual animals as monsters is when the normal looks abnormal. The most obvious case of this, of course, is mange. We see this a lot when we see chupacabra sightings. Chupacabra sightings are, I would say, 99% of the time an animal that has mange and therefore looks completely different from what we would expect it to look like. For any of you who might have seen a dog or a cat, or in this case a bear or a raccoon with mange, it doesn't look anything like anything you've ever seen before. These are cases of eidetic mange. This is a type of mange that is not contagious, but it does spread throughout the skin of the infected animal, underneath the skin, through the bloodstream. Up here in the upper left, you have a black bear with mange. The arms are so human looking that it often throws people when they see a bear with mange because they can't identify what animal they're looking at. And on the upper right, you have a ringtail cat with mange in China. On the bottom here, you have probably the most famous chupacabra sighting. This is actually a stuffed chupacabra that you can find in Arizona. And that is simply a wild dog, and probably a coy dog, which is a cross between a coyote and a dog, which explains the longer hind limbs and the shorter forelimbs, which is often quoted as a trait of the chupacabra in Mexico, is they have really long hind legs and really short forelegs. And that's very classic for coyotes or coy dogs, coyote dog crossbreeds. And on the bottom right, you see a spectacled bear with a very serious case of mange also. Oh, yes. The chupacabra is the answer to the goat sucker question. So you end up a lot with sightings of people seeing things like this that they can't explain simply because an animal without hair looks very different from an animal with hair. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about this, but first I want to warn you that I'm going to show you some pictures of some dead animals. I don't know if there is anybody sensitive in the audience who might not really want to see those kind of photos. I worked in animal pathology for so long that sometimes I really don't think about how other people view pictures of dead animals. So I just want to give you a heads up because I'm about to show you a picture of an animal that was found deceased, and it was unidentified and actually came to our laboratory for us to identify what this animal was. And you guys have probably seen this or a picture of this if you're involved in any of the skeptical literature or on Facebook. This is called the Montauk monster, and this was an animal that washed ashore on the coast of Montauk Island, which is is adjacent to Long Island in New York. The Montauk monster is very unique looking. It has what appears to be a bone beak on top and then teeth on the bottom. The arms and legs are very disproportionate from most other animals around its size. It's about the size of a large house cat or a small, medium-sized dog. And there were several artifacts of decomposition that were taking place on this animal. The first of which was this scaly kind of leathery skin. This is what happens with extreme sun exposure during the process of decomposition, and it makes the skin kind of crackle. And this, of course, can throw people off because they think, oh, wow, this animal had scales. And the first description that we got of this animal before it came to the laboratory was that this had, cracked skin, and it was rough skin, rough leathery skin. And in reality, this animal before it died probably had soft, supple skin, the same as any other, but it was simply an artifact of the decomposition process. And it ends up that this animal was actually a dead and in advanced stage of decomposition, a raccoon. Now, raccoons have a very interesting muzzle, and the muzzle on the top, when it begins to decompose, when that nose rots and the teeth, if the teeth are gone, and this raccoon was missing its top teeth, actually leaves the nasal bone, this ridge right here, that looks like a beak. And that's what led to this kind of misconception that this animal had a short brachiocephalic type beak. So, but it was confirmed on autopsy and DNA testing that this was a raccoon. Later, the people who were responsible for taking the photographs and finding this animal confirmed that they knew it was a raccoon to begin with. And they actually were responsible for setting this raccoon's body on fire and sending it off in a little Viking funeral into the ocean. And then when it washed up on shore later, they took a picture of it. And that was one of the other reasons that the skin was very scaly, is because the fur had burned off of him. So now, this was one of the most interesting cases that I've ever read about, and unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to actually be a part of any investigations with this animal. But this was a wonderful study on decomposition. And this was a monster that was found in Panama, referred to as the new Montauk monster. This was found about 2 years ago now, and so it was referred to as like the new Montauk. And upon further investigation, of course, and skeletal, even just skeletal observation, if you look at the skeleton after the stages of decomposition, you can tell that it was certainly a two-toed sloth. And if you look at the hind leg, you can actually see the claw of the monster. Of course, the first two photos that were released were the photo of the face, which looks decidedly alien, because how many of us ever see a bloated, skinless or hairless sloth face? And then the body. Of course, this animal is in an advanced state of decomposition, having lost all of its hair and having gotten a bloated belly, which made its arms appear even skinnier than the loss of hair did. So, but I have to admit, if I had come across this in a creek bed, the way that two teenage boys did, I would be terrified. And that doesn't look like anything that you would ever expect to come across. And so you can certainly understand how you could think, wow, man, I got to get a picture of this and put it on the internet and I'll be famous. So, but the boys did go back, and they went back with a biologist, and they took a picture of the further decomposition, which is the third picture of the animal after it had been picked clean by various scavengers and buzzards and whatnot. Now, the chupacabra is very interesting because it is in every way a true modern monster. And I didn't believe this when I heard it for the first time. But my friend Benjamin Radford wrote a book called Tracking the Chupacabra. And we actually had him as a speaker at the North Texas Skeptics meeting a couple of months ago. And he talked about how this is a new myth with embedded lore. And I actually had experienced this firsthand with my students saying, yeah, my grandfather saw a chupacabra when he was growing up as a kid in Mexico. When the first mention of chupacabra in any literature was in 1996, which is very recently. And I think a lot of us think of the chupacabra as like an old Mexican folk tale or this goat sucker vampire lore, when the chupacabra is actually quite new and one of the newer of all of the monsters. And there are two prevailing theories about the chupacabra. There's the Puerto Rican chupacabra, which is kind of more lizard, alien-like. And Ben actually tracked this particular chupacabra myth to the movie Species. And because what's very interesting is the movie Species came out in 1995. And the first recorded sighting of this Puerto Rican chupacabra with these particular traits of the long spindly fingers and the spines coming out of the back and walking on what we call digitigrade, walking on their toes versus walking on plantigrade on their feet, all are characteristic of the Natasha Henstridge in the movie Species. Now, of course, the American chupacabra that most people are more familiar with here in Texas are the canid-like dogs. Those are generally coyotes, wolves, or dogs with mange, and are found looking weird or looking disproportionate because they are not covered in fur. And if you're more interested in the chupacabra lore and this idea of embedded lore, of saying this is a myth that's been around for hundreds of years, even though nobody had ever heard of it prior to 1996, you should pick up Ben Radford's book, Tracking the Chupacabra. I highly recommend it. It just came out a couple months ago, so it is a fantastic read. And with that, we have Howard, who's going to read us a poem. Thank you very much.
I'm not entirely sure why Justin asked me to read this. He did say that since it's a made-up words, that I don't have to obsess about my pronunciation. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre in gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the maxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And, as in uffish thought he stood, the jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with his head, he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, Calloo, Calais, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre in gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrabe.
Thanks, Howard, for agreeing to read that for me. I'm going to use this as a launching point to talk about some of the issues involving ways in which myths of various creatures might come up. So it's hard to make sense of what's going on in Jabberwocky. We'll start with this is printed in Alice's adventures through the looking glass. And so after Alice reads the poem, her initial reaction is, well, it seems very pretty, but it's rather hard to understand. And it seems like that's right. You know, it is mostly nonsense. A lot of the words are made up words. And so it's really hard to make sense of what's going on in the poem. But on the other hand, Alice also says, well, somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas, only I don't know exactly what they are. Somebody killed something, that's clear at any rate. And so it seems like, well, we can make quite a bit of sense of what's going on in Jabberwocky. And you know, one way of pointing this out is to say, well, what language is it in? It's in English. This is definitely English we're reading, even if most of the words in it aren't actual English words. Well, there are some English words in it. You know, things like when it says, did gyre and gimble in the wabe? Well, did and in and the, these are all English words. So there are enough ordinary English words mixed in with the nonsense words to give us a sense that this is English, and it's not just English, it's got English syntax, it's pretty grammatical. I mean, it's a sort of archaic form that poetry often has, but it's familiar English that we're seeing here. Furthermore, the words that are made-up words, well, these have English morphology. They're stringing letters together in a way that is pretty easy to pronounce, that makes sense as letters. It's not like, you know, XKCD, which I guess the artist chose as a letter that couldn't be, a sequence of letters that couldn't be pronounced, that couldn't be an English word. You know, all the words in Jabberwocky, these could be English words. They're strung together in the right sorts of ways, and a lot of them are even evocative of real words. When he goes galumphing away, we get an idea of what's going on when somebody's galumphing, even if it's a word that you haven't heard before. And so you can tell that Jabberwocky, although it's a lot of nonsense, it's starting with enough real stuff, a skeleton of real English words, and tweaking that and splicing together in strange ways and stuff like that. But the reason that Jabberwocky makes as much sense as it does is because it's starting so much with real English and mixing and matching parts of it together. Good. Okay, so this is what's going on in a lot of cases of various fantastical creatures, and Jamie talked about a number of these. I'll go through a few myself, some are repetitions of hers. We'll start with the camel leopard that I talked to you all about, and the Greeks thought it was a myth, as did many of you, but in fact, a camel leopard is a giraffe, and in fact, the scientific name for a giraffe is something like Giraffa camelolepardus, which is recognizing this. So it is, you know, a leopard, spotted camel, more or less, and so that's what a giraffe is. A few of you got that right, good job. But that's a case of a real creature that's a sort of splicing together, but this is a sort of common way of making up lots of fake creatures as well. So you could splice a lion's body together with an eagle's front half and wings and get a griffin that way, or if you replace the head with a human head, you can get a sphinx. Guess adding human body parts onto animals is a pretty common way of generating these things. You know, you can stick a human body onto a horse and you get a centaur, human body onto a fish, you get a mermaid. Or you can do it without splicing body parts, but just sort of anthropomorphizing creatures. If you give a bull human-like characteristics and maybe fingers, then you can get a minotaur that way. Or another answer to one of the quiz questions, the cross between a reptile and a bird that would be a missing link that creationists are looking for. Here's Kirk Cameron with his picture of a crocoduck, which is what I was looking for on that one. It's obviously photoshopped, but it looks pretty real. So there's you know, lots of examples of these myths are created just, you know, sort of in the same way that Jabberwocky ends up being somewhat sensical, is we're taking various different parts and splicing them together to make these different mythical creatures. Okay. So an interesting question here is, well, which myths are likely to survive? Which myths are most likely to get passed on? And so here I'm going to draw on some work by people working in the cognitive science of religion. So we have Pascal Boyer, who's at Washington University in St. Louis, and Bob McCauley, who's at Emory University in Atlanta. And they've identified a number of features and done various experiments to confirm that these sorts of features make a difference to which myths people are most likely to pay attention to and remember and to pass on with high fidelity to other people. So one idea that they have is that there are cost-free inferences, that if you hear about various creatures, like if you hear about, say, a centaur that has a horse's body and a man's torso and arms and whatever, well, you know what to expect from that. It can run fast like a horse can. It can hold a bow like a man's torso can. It can think and talk the way that somebody with a man's head can. So you can infer pretty quickly, just from the description of a centaur, what sorts of things a centaur is likely to be capable of. Macaulay contrasts this to suppose you had an armchair that's the offspring of crocodiles that can read humans' minds but can't remember their thoughts about donuts for any longer than 24 hours. Well, maybe, oh, it's invisible also. You can hold all that stuff in mind, maybe, but it's hard to figure out what exactly to expect from an invisible armchair like this. And so this would be, at least part of the reason why this sort of myth would be less likely to survive very well is because it's just hard to know what to expect from a strange thing like that, whereas many of the mythical creatures that do survive, it's pretty easy to figure out what sorts of things to expect from them. Second sort of feature that helps a lot is that the creature's sort of attention grabbing, especially if it's going to be a danger, if it's going to eat you or suck all the blood out of your livestock or stuff like that. That's likely to grab your attention. Being memorable, and various experiments about which sorts of ideas are more easy for people to remember, but basically if a myth's more memorable, it's more likely to survive. Being easily communicable, if you can describe really easily what's going on in the case of this mythical creature, which in many of these cases where it's just splicing two things together is really easy. The front half's from a human and the back half's from a fish, something like that. Hey, that's easy to describe. And this idea of motivatingness, so this, I guess, comes up especially when they're looking at which religious myths are likely to survive, where, if this makes a difference to whether rain will fall on your crops or whether you'll get a nice afterlife, then you can be motivated to tell the myth and be sure to pass it on to other people. This is also true in the case of many of these mythical creatures that we're talking about. If this creature poses a real danger to you and your family, that can be a motivation to be sure to learn about it and be sure to tell other people to watch out for it. So these are all features that these folks have identified as being ones that make a difference to whether myths are likely to survive and be passed on in a population of humans. Now we can contrast this against, well, which creatures are likely to actually evolve in nature? So here I have a cartoon by Darwin's contemporaries. So they were making fun of Darwin right from the beginning. I guess the first thing here to notice that evolution will reward whatever traits work. If you get a survival or reproductive advantage over existing traits, evolution will reward that, regardless of whether or not that fits with our sort of expectations that we are going to make cost-free inferences using, and regardless of whether that ends up making a creature that's so complicated that it's hard to remember or hard to communicate easily. Anybody who's taken an anatomy class knows that, yeah, it's really hard remembering all this complicated stuff that's going on inside actual creatures, and communication of it can be pretty challenging also, as people who work in science education know. So Mother Nature doesn't always give us the sorts of creatures that would be really easy to have survive as sorts of urban legends or as myths. It's also worth noting that nature can't just splice completely different creatures together at will. Instead, nature is stuck tinkering with existing designs, and often the results just aren't going to be all that exciting. I mean, sometimes they are, and depending on your interests, science is often really fascinating, but it's often not quite as exciting as the stuff that that people can make up is, and so that can affect whether or not you get this sort of attention-grabbing and motivatingness that's best suited for myths that'll pass the test of time. Good. So we're seeing these sorts of differences between what myths you'd expect to be most likely to survive and what sorts of creatures we actually expect to evolve. We'll look at these with a couple of the other examples I gave you all in the quiz. Here's the Mexican water monster. It's an axolotl. And in fact, I guess this was a fan who made this motivational poster. It says, axolotl, great animal or greatest animal. And it is a pretty good candidate for greatest animal. They're pretty remarkable creatures. I'm not sure if you can see the cute little face and the frilly fins and the hands with fingers there. Here's another axolotl picture that I really like too. So yeah, they are pretty cute. Pretty awesome creatures. The facts about these are pretty weird. It's not just splicing a fish onto a human body or something like that. It's a salamander, but it's the larval stage of salamander. So salamanders usually have a larval stage and then metamorphose into an adult stage, but axolotls don't. The evolutionary reason for this is that the land around the lakes that they lived in wasn't very friendly to salamanders, and it was a lot better just to stay in the water rather than to get out, and so they evolved suppression of the metamorphosis, and so they just stay in this larval stage throughout their lives. So they're kind of strange salamanders, and have the regenerative abilities that a lot of salamanders have. So they're pretty remarkable creatures, but figuring out all the details of what's going on in these, it's not just splice two creatures together, something that's nice and simple and easy to pass on. The full story of what's going on here is much more complicated, much more difficult to pass on, but maybe in some sense much more fascinating in the end, at least to me. The squawking hedgehog is an echidna, a spiny anteater, which is a marsupial. Marsupials, well, I guess it's a monotreme. It's not even quite a marsupial, but they are closely related to marsupials and diverged from other mammals very early in the history of mammals. So they're quite strange creatures that have egg births and stuff like that. And figuring out what's going on with these, it's not just a cross between a bird and a hedgehog. Instead, it's a very fascinating, complicated, difficult to discuss creature in its own right. Good. Okay, so that was the answer to that question also. Good. So I want to draw just two morals from this. So the first moral is that nature has the liberty to produce creatures that are much stranger than fiction, though usually it's going to be in complicated ways that involve tinkering from old designs rather than just random splicing the way fiction authors can. But you can end up with much stranger, much more complicated things than any popular work of fiction could ever do and still be popular. So that's one moral. And the other moral is that I encourage you to get in the habit of asking yourself, whenever you hear some sort of story, ask yourself, would this story survive in our population even if it weren't true? And if it's a sort of story that's catchy and easy to pass on and would survive even if it weren't true, then you should probably ask yourself, well, I better have more evidence before I believe this. Just hearing a story like this, if it would have survived, regardless of whether it's true, that's not enough to get me to believe it. Instead, you should be more skeptical and demand more evidence before you would believe a catchy story like that. Good. So those are the two morals I wanted to draw. The other thing I want to do is let you know who our winners were, and I had to break some ties on this on the basis I gave more points to the people who got the names right than to the just guessing fact or fiction right. So here are the winners that I have. So if I can get you to come up, I'll give you your free drinks from Starbucks. We have Chris Pritchett. Is it Pritchell? Pritchett? Great, Chris. Congratulations. We have Dory Mooneyham. Oh, you guys are sitting together. Should check and see whether you got the same runs right. I don't know. There's Dory. Great. Congratulations. And Sarah Pierce. Yeah, you got close enough to. Yeah. Great. Congratulations. Great. Okay. So next up, we'll have Zach telling us about Bigfoot.
All right, so I get to tell you guys about Bigfoot, which is personally my favorite monster of all the groups, and also why it's the situation is pretty interesting, but the evidence is pretty poor. So we'll take a quick look through that. So most of you are probably familiar with this image. This is the classic Bigfoot image. This is actually from a film that was shot by two guys in California back in the 60s of some sort of a apparent creature basically walking away from them and swinging its arms wide. This is called the Patterson-Gimlin film after the two guys that shot the movie. And this remains to this day really the only clear film or video of this supposed creature that exists. Everything else that follows is really pretty poor. Now, I have, in my youth, I spent a lot of time camping and hiking and backpacking through the woods. And so I actually have some Bigfoot experiences of my own. This is me hiking with my cousin, Steve. And we would go very much off the beaten trail. We got sick of camping close to other people pretty soon, and so we would go far a range. And we've actually had some weird experiences. We've heard some odd sounds in the woods. And one time even both of us woke up in the middle of the night and we heard some animal, some creature actually sort of moving through our campsite. Could not really see anything. We were both too terrified to even move. We just sort of stayed in our sleeping bags and just let the thing walk past. In the morning, I got up and I found my pack, which I had strung up pretty high in a tree, had actually been opened and a number of my things had been taken out and strewn about, which weirded the hell out of me, I have to say. So what was that? I don't know, but that's one of those experiences that really piqued my interest in Bigfoot, and is part of the reason why, I'm really, I try to be a skeptic as much as possible, but I am a Bigfoot cheerleader. I absolutely love the idea of Bigfoot, and I really hope that we're able to find something. But I'm also partially skeptical of the whole Bigfoot situation because I know at least one time I was Bigfoot. For some people. So this is actually a picture of me. This is my own personal blob squatch photograph. This is a picture of me. Again, like I said, we got tired and bored of the standard stuff, and so I especially got into very ultra primitive backpacking. And in fact, this is me wearing nothing more than basically a loincloth and carrying nothing else through the woods. Believe me, there are far more embarrassing photos that were possible, but have been since lost to the annals of time. But at any rate, so this is how I used to cavort in the woods, basically half naked, sometimes even covered in dirt and mud in order to sort of conceal my human scent. And one evening, I was sort of hiking along some of the ridges in Kentucky, in the Daniel Boone National Forest. And I'd grown accustomed to just sort of walking around at night without a flashlight or any other light, because your eyes really get accustomed to the starlight, especially when it's a clear night. And it was not a problem for me. And I was making my way down a ridge back towards the place where I planned on spending the night. And I could see this very obvious campfire. And when you're out there in the woods with nothing, just basically walking around kind of like an animal, the human presence is very obvious. And so I was trying to sort of skirt around this campfire where I could see these, I guess, other college kids just, partying or whatever. And I was sort of wondering to myself and sort of challenging myself, I wonder how close I can get to those people without really them noticing me. And I actually got pretty close. But then I ran into a bush, and I made a lot of noise, and I scared the shit out of them. And instantly, they were like, "What the hell is that?" And the people, they were whipping out their flashlights and shining them to the woods. And of course, I didn't want them to catch them when I stayed, so I ran away, and it was very obviously just 2 feet stamping away. And so I'm pretty sure that for those people, when they went back home, they said there was a Bigfoot near our campsite. And that was me. So anyway, so that's I'm sort of on both sides of it because I've had my own weird experiences and I've caused some weird experiences for other people. So it's kind of interesting. But why is the idea of Bigfoot so compelling? Maybe I would say even more so than the idea of the goat sucker or some of these other Loch Ness monsters. Well, the reason is, of course, we know that it's biologically possible to have these bipedal primates. Of course, we are bipedal primates. We evolved. There's no reason why another bipedal primate could not have evolved also. And we actually have some fossil evidence of very larger than human apes. What you see here is a reconstruction of one that we know about called Gigantopithecus blacki, which is extinct. But which was apparently a prehistoric giant, basically an orangutan. It was most closely related to the orangutan that lived in East Asia, basically China and Eastern Russia. So we know it's biologically possible. There's nothing really about the Bigfoot concept that really contradicts anything that we know about the world and the way it works. It's not like a centaur or a mermaid or anything like that. And in fact, if you take your kids to see Ice Age 4, one of the characters is actually a Gigantopithecus right here. I think his name is Gut in the movie. My kid is not old enough for me to enjoy such fare as this, but at any rate, if you do have kids in the Ice Age bracket, you'll see a Gigantopithecus, a prehistoric Bigfoot. And Bigfoot is actually, after the Patterson-Gimlin film that I showed earlier, it sort of became a part of our popular culture, and it's something that we all sort of know about. And In Search Of, if you're much older than me, actually, you probably know of the In Search Of series with Leonard Nimoy, which did a special on Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Sasquatch is sort of the Indian name for the creature. There's also Harry and the Hendersons back in the 80s. Simpsons has had Sasquatch, and if you're familiar with Tenacious D, the band, then they have a special affinity for Sasquatch as well. So Bigfoot is sort of all over in the popular culture, and we all sort of know about it. And it's one of those concepts that's easy to to communicate. Like Justin was saying, it's basically a large human-ape hybrid. And one of the reasons that it's really been sort of exploding in the 21st century is in large part due to this organization here, which they now have their own series on Animal Planet called Finding Bigfoot. So far they haven't found anything, I have to say. But this is the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, headed by Matt Moneymaker right over there. And they consider themselves to be the best scientific organization that's pursuing Bigfoot right now. But I have to say their sort of brand of science is basically the same sort of thing as the ghost hunters. They basically tramp around the woods with night vision cameras and microphones and things like that and try to collect evidence. But they don't really know what to do with it. And all of the people that are part of the group believe in Bigfoot anyway. So what they basically do is they find some sort of a phenomenon, document it, and then rule out in their heads any other thing that it could possibly be, and they say, well, it must be a Bigfoot then. If they say, well, this doesn't look like a bear, this doesn't look like a deer, well, it must be a Bigfoot, obviously. So that's sort of their scientific approach. And the scientific evidence that they have predominantly is this huge database of sightings that have been collected primarily over the past decade or so. This is actually a layer on the Google Earth. They have a dynamic, updated collection of all their sightings on Google Earth. And you can see they're all over the United States, going as far back as 1850 or so. Although I should point out that the number of sightings between 1850 and the Patterson-Gimlin film is like a handful. And most of them don't refer to a Bigfoot per se. It's just a large, hairy creature out in the woods that people can barely see. Interestingly enough, most people, when they think of Bigfoot, they think of the Pacific Northwest, and certainly that's a huge concentration of sightings. But there are two hotbeds of Bigfoot sightings that also exist in this country. One is Ohio, where I'm from, for some reason, is an absolute hotbed of Bigfoot sightings. And then the other is Texas, especially East Texas. A lot of sightings there for some reason. And so this is, all these sightings, all these reports, and we don't really have anything physical to go on. There are some footprints that are out there. We know that some number of those have been hoaxed. Some of the others that we're not quite sure about, but there's really nothing yet definitive. There are some very blatant hoaxes. In fact, this was the Georgia Bigfoot. You may have heard about this a couple of years ago. A couple guys claimed that they had caught or found a dead Bigfoot, and they put it in their freezer. And it got quite a bit of media attention. Turns out it's basically a gorilla suit with some entrails, some like pig entrails put on it, and then covered with water and frozen. And that turned out to be an absolute hoax. The other one, this is the quote-unquote Sonoma Bigfoot video, which the BFRO still regards, I think, as legitimate, even after it was demonstrated by Penn and Teller that they had produced the video for their show Bullshit. And this is the actor that was portraying the Bigfoot coming off of the set there. So there are some blatant hoaxes, and there's a whole number of other appearances which are just very, very little. There's what we call blob squatches. Just little images off in the distance. We have no idea what they are. But these hoaxes, why do we fall for these things? Why do we see these things out in the woods? Well, number one, pareidolia. This is a very common phenomenon. We all fall victim to it. We see patterns and intention in the random noise of our environment. I can think of when I was in graduate school. Right up the hallway from my laboratory was the bathroom that I would use, just about every day. And for some weird reason, the sink had a paper towel dispenser situated right next to it. And whenever I would go to wash my hands in the sink, something about the shape of that paper towel dispenser evoked in my mind the idea of somebody staring at me, just the way it was shaped, and maybe that one of the screws was placed in a certain way. But every time I came up to the sink, I would see this face staring at me, and it creeped the hell out of me. The first time, it was weird. The second time, it was a little bit less weird. And after that, of course, I was expecting it. But it was still in my peripheral vision. I couldn't shake it. My brain kept saying to me, there's somebody looking at you. There's somebody looking at you. And the other thing that happens to us all is priming. Of course, we have images and concepts in our collective subconscious. These could be either Jungian archetypes or other things that we've seen before. For example, what Jamie was talking about with Chupacabra and the movie Species. The very same thing has happened with a lot of alien sightings as well, where people see aliens. Betty and Barney Hill were likely primed by a TV show, a science fiction TV show, before they had their experiences. And there's something else that's interesting that I should mention. The Bigfoot as a part of our cultural psychology. There's an interesting theory that's been put forth by Dr. Brian Regal, who he makes the claim that the cultural predecessor, the precursor to Bigfoot in our culture, Western culture, was actually the werewolf. That there are lots of werewolf sightings when people went out in the woods and they saw weird hairy creatures, or when they saw or when they heard weird things, they interpret those as being werewolves. And the werewolves died off right about the time that Darwin published On the Origin of Species. And then we started seeing those things interpreted as Bigfoots. And the previous paradigm had been that humans and wolves, these were just two different forms that were possible, sort of in a Platonic sense. But with Darwin, it became, well, no, actually it's humans and apes that are more closely related. And so the idea of a hybrid between the two was more culturally viable. So what would it take, at the end of the day, what would it take for me to actually believe what I want to believe? Well, number one, we would need a clear photo. Even the Patterson-Gimlin film is not a clear. We would need some clear video or film. Optimally, a dead body, really, to make, this is how animals are identified, across zoology, and this is how it's always been. We need some sort of a specimen. And even better would be a live animal, of course. So that's what it would take for Bigfoot, which I hope we're able to get at some point. And now I'll turn back over to Alix.
Thank you, Zach. Now, before I get into announcements, we are running a little bit over time because we started a little bit late because of traffic. So we're going to actually interrupt the scheduled program to have the kids who have been working on something for us. And go ahead and bring them in. Come on in. All right, where do we start? I'll just give it to you.
You want to talk? Darling. Okay, we have a few things for y'all today. We actually merged all the classes together. We now have 4 classes going on. We have 3 months to age 2. We have mature toddlers to kindergarten, 1st through 5th, and then 6th and up. But because it's Father's Day, a little low numbers today, we kind of merged all the kids together, did one activity, and then split them apart and did some different activities as well. No one wants to talk about the plants they learned about, so we're going to let the person that taught them about the plants talk about that.
All right, I brought a bunch of stuff in from the yard. I brought mint and, some wild grapes and a lot of weeds that, just to get them out of the yard anyway. And we dissected flowers. I have passion flowers growing in my yard, which the plant parts are very obvious on those. So that was fun for them to pull them apart and see the different parts of the plants.
And one quick thing off subject, Jeff Elmer needs to leave a little early today, and he's in charge of the badges. So can I have everyone go ahead and pass your badges down to the end of the row for the bucket? We'll take up a little badge offering here. Thank you. And then, of course, the littles, we just took a little walk outside in the wagon, played it in the room. And then everyone learned, or actually wrote a song today, and they're going to sing that for you. And then parents, please be sure to sign your child out of class. They can't leave the room until you sign them out. So please don't forget about your kids. Kids, don't forget about your parents. Okay, go ahead, guys.
With the help of special guest Jenny Peel. Anyway, we thought we'd get a little serious, and since this is the meeting before 4th of July, and we're not going to have one till after, we're going to jump the gun, and we did a patriotic song about the 4th of July and Sherry Pie. It's a very, very serious song. Okay.
On the 4th of July, I eat cherry pie. I eat with my children, I eat with my wife, I eat with my fingers, a fork and a knife on the 4th of July. I eat cherry pie. Guitar.
Okay, before the teachers leave, since we now have all new teachers for the classrooms, this is so wonderful, guys. I got to give over all of my bins. I had enough room in the car to bring a wagon today. Isn't this wonderful? I don't have to bring anything anymore. Thank y'all so much. So we have, for 6th grade and up, Nicole and Emily are the teachers. Yes, please. For 1st through 5th grade is Elaine in the back and Jay. For mature toddler to age 6 is Jason and Anne. And I'm currently in charge of the babies right now.
Okay, we're close. All right. Again, in the back, we do have the. You want to come? Okay, come on up.
Thank you. Just keep this really brief. The Women of Reason Dallas we are getting together and planning a conference, which is scheduled for September 15th at the Resource Center in Dallas. Our keynote speakers are TBA. We're hoping to have that announced soon. We are planning on having an Eventbrite site up fairly soon, in early July, for registration. But currently we do have panels put together. Secular parenting is one of the topics. Diversity in Freethought, and one that we think everybody will appreciate: what atheist women really want. We will offer childcare, so please don't let that stop you. And just to note, a lot of our Word events have been women only, but this conference will be women and men. Registration does start in July. Another word about Cupcakes for a Cause. We were going to announce the winners at 1:30. I think we'll still do that because I guess we're out of here at 2. Okay. Cocktails for a Cause. This is on the meetup site, so just take a look at it there, but it will be for the Word conference. Thank you.
Where's Zach? You've done this so long. I almost want to just, okay, I'll do it. All right, let's see, how does this go? And remember, Freethought is not free. We still have a lot of actual costs that we deal with to bring you this wonderful program, and a lot of the other things that we're working on. Again, we do have a new board that took office this month. Next month, we'll go ahead and really do a real introduction into what some of us actually do, because I know it's been somewhat of a mystery for most. But we'd like to invite you to a general meeting that is going to be July 22nd, and we think it's going to be 10:30 or so. Please come in, give us your input. We want to hear what you all have to say, so all are welcome. All right, and let's see, don't throw away our plates. We do have a green initiative. We're trying to be as green as we can. There are bins that are labeled dirty plates. Go ahead and once you're done with it, go ahead and toss it in there. We have volunteers that take them home and make sure that they get cleaned. And the rule of thumb, right, being a good potluck person, again, especially for, if you're new, you didn't bring anything, that's fine, please partake. When you come back, we hope you do come back, bring a main dish, enough for at least yourself with equal sides, etc., ready to serve. And we've already done the Freethought Kids. Yes, Justin?
I just want to make a quick announcement. The Philosophy Club that meets monthly, we're starting a new section on philosophy of science. So if you have been thinking about joining the group, now's a great time to join because we're starting a new group. So you'll be at the same starting point as everybody else in this stuff. So check that out on the meetup page.
And those are really interesting meetups, I gotta tell you. All right, any other announcement from other board members? That's it? Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and break. We'll see you again next month. Again, we'll see you at the General Assembly if you choose to come. Thank you very much.